Today's video was originally going to be one looking in on the rookies of training camp. How are they doing so far? From Jalen Reagor all the way down to the undrafted free agents. And then I thought I should do a 53-man roster prediction. As per normal on this channel, both ideas were absolutely obliterated when the Eagles decided to expedite their roster cut-down process. Now, the team do have until Saturday at 4 PM Eastern to take an 80-man roster down to 53. They've already made a significant dent in that, and what we're going to do today is go through each move, look at some of the surprises. There were definitely a couple of shocks and players I'd like to discuss and project what's going to happen over the next couple of days. Before we get into it, we do need to understand the differences between this year and last year. Teams can now have a 16-man practice squad, which is very significant because it means not only can you carry an extra 6 players, and players who may have been on the bubble and unfortunately got cut and don't have a home, they can now stick around and develop, but 2 of those spots are known as flex spots, which mean that once a week, 2 players can rotate onto the back end of the 53 and back off again without fear of losing their roster spot or exposing them to waivers. So this means that positions where depth is really low and you need that extra help, you don't have to call a player up for 2 weeks while your starter's down, then risk losing him to waivers after he's had a good performance. You can keep him on the team. That's very important, and I'm sure he's going to play a lot into these decisions. So with that in mind, here are the moves the Eagles made today. I'm going to group this first bunch together because I do think they're all relatively in the same boat for one reason or another. We've got wide receiver Manessa Bailey, tight end Tyrone Swoops, guard Julian Good-Jones, wide receiver Marcus Green, DB Elijah Riley, and wide receiver Travis Fulgham. All of these guys I think were on the outside looking in, the majority of them undrafted free agents. 3 of them came in relatively late. We saw tight end Tyrone Swoops sign very late on after being with the Seahawks most of the offseason. We saw Travis Fulgham follow the same suit. He was looking to make his impact via special teams. The Eagles were carrying more than 10 healthy receivers for the majority of the offseason. So if you think they're realistically going to carry 5 or 6 on the roster, being in that extra 4 just to even get on the practice squad is a long shot. I wouldn't be surprised to see someone like Marcus Green back. The Eagles did make a real concerted effort to not only bring him in, but to move pieces around to facilitate his return. He was originally signed to a futures contract, was waived later on, and now I think could well be coming back once again after a brief window to shine in training camp where he didn't really do too badly. Now the next man to watch is Luke Jurigan. He's the backup center to Jason Kelsey, and as far as I'm aware, the only backup center on the roster that is a devout center. The rest are kind of guards or tackles that are swing players who can fill that position. It's smart from Howie Roseman if they can get him on the practice squad, because at the end of the day, the offensive line is stricken right now by injury. Dillard is down. We know Brandon Brooks is down. Is Jason Peters going to move to tackle? Are we going to see Matt Pryor starting at right guard? Is Mailata making the roster? The Eagles are going to have to be very smart with their offensive line depth and the versatility that comes with it. Now more than ever, versatility is valuable, and for Luke Jurigan, a devout backup center, Jason Kelsey, touch wood, doesn't get injured that much. He's one of the more durable players along that Eagles offensive front. It's very seldom that the Eagles have to go into a game without one of the most athletic, most iconic centers in the NFL. And with that in mind, it's not a necessity to keep him around right now. You don't need Luke Jurigan in the picture. If you can stash him on the practice squad, let him develop, and then call him up on a rotational basis should something happen. If something does happen and you don't have him, I do think they like guys like Jack Driscoll. I think Matt Pryor could be an option. Nate Herbig could well be another one. The fact he's not in that first wave of cuts is very impressive. He's another versatile guy, someone that could play multiple spots along that offensive line. And we also, let's not forget, Isaac Seumalo has significant experience at center. So if Jason Kelsey went down, Seumalo, having spent an offseason at center with the Eagles, could well transition inside, and then we see someone like Herbig, maybe someone like Driscoll, or dare I say it, Jason Peters, slide to left guard and really solidify that for the time being. Now the next 2 players came as real big shocks to me. The first one is defensive back Grayland Arnold, purely because the Eagles lost Will Parks to injury. It's only a short-term injury. It's only going to be a few weeks. He should all be fine. You've got Kayvon Wallace, Jalen Mills, and Rodney McLeod. Those are your 3 safeties. Now, Marcus Epps, by the looks of it, is at least through the first wave. He does not sit well in the memory of Eagles fans after that atrocious play against the Seahawks. He's a core special teams guy, though, much like Rudy Ford, who I think would stick around. But Grayland Arnold was someone the Eagles were very, very high on. If you watched our interview with him, you'll understand that in that long-term role to eventually replace Rodney McLeod, who is only on a one-year deal. So Grayland Arnold not making the roster is a little bit concerning. He did have a fairly strong camp by all accounts, and if he sits on that practice squad, fine. If he can be used in a rotational basis, that's fine. But as one of the more higher paid undrafted free agents, I do think there's a risk they lose him there. And it might come back to bite them. Like, I don't see the logic in not keeping him around, or at least keeping Marcus Epps over him, unless it is purely special teams. That was the first one that caught me off guard. I was rooting for Grayland Arnold. I was hoping he'd make the roster. Doesn't seem to be the case. Next one is wide receiver Deontay Burnett. Arguably, training camp's brightest star. Like, the guy was making plays left, right, and center. Was absolutely brilliant. A former New York Jet. Has NFL experience. Came in and, just like Greg Ward Jr., a bit short of the mark. And with so much congestion in that wide receiver room, you've got to feel like if he put in that kind of performance in any other locker room in the NFL, then he would have a chance of making the roster. The fact it happens to be an Eagles team where you've got so much speed, you've got so much depth at the top end, it's a top-heavy depth chart that you feel like he was at a disadvantage. He was on the outside looking in. Now he's forced himself into a situation where the team want to keep him on the practice squad. Bad news for the Eagles is there is a good chance another team comes knocking, maybe someone familiar, like the New York Jets, who may well be looking for wide receiver help. I don't know. But I think that Deontay Burnett is at risk of being lost. I would love to see him kept around. I would love to see him rotated onto the roster. The good news is, though, that this does mean I think Kes Watkins makes the cut. There was some concern before training camp. I certainly felt that way, that he was going to have to take a significant leap to get up to a level of John Hightower. And I think he's done that. I think Kes Watkins is really impressed. There were those early clips of him beating Darius Slay and beating Rasul Douglas, and a lot of people started to believe the hype with Kes Watkins, and that's really becoming a reality. So if the coaching staff are in that same boat, Kes Watkins is looking good. I love to see it. I think that's a very promising sign that most of your draft class, if not all of it, can make the roster first time round. That's really, really good. But finally, the last two really shook me, because it really does mean the Eagles are not doing a running back by committee anymore. It's just not happening. There is no RB4 unless the team go to Ronald Jones. That's the thing. Unless they look to Ronald Jones, in which case it'd be that thumper behind Corey Clement, then I don't know. Because the team have decided to waive Elijah Holyfield, Adrian Killins, and Michael Warren. Now, the latter of the three, Michael Warren, was pretty silent all camp. I didn't see much noise about him whatsoever. But the first two, Holyfield in specific, had a really good summer. Like, he was constantly being noted as someone becoming more versatile, using his hands out of the backfield, which for a running back that looks like Brock Lesnar isn't easy to do. He really added that to his game in the same way we saw Jordan Howard do it under Juice Staley last year. So I was disappointed that Holyfield wasn't kept on as an RB4. And if you're not keeping four running backs, to me that either signifies A, you're keeping an extra wide receiver, which would have been Deontay Burnett, B, a position like safety where you've got an injury, or C, I don't know. This is really, really odd that the team, this is the first time in the Doug Peterson era that they haven't kept a running back four. As of right now, your running backs are an injured Miles Sanders, Boston Scott, and Corey Clement. That's not great. I think they needed that depth. So unless there is an ulterior motive here, unless there is a move where they're going to rotate them off the practice squad, it's confusing. Adrian Killins, arguably the fastest Eagles player on the roster, started to really heat up towards the end of camp, making a lot of traction, a lot of plays in open space on screens. He's got nice cuts to him, very, very explosive through the hole. I think he could have been a great fit for this team, very much a Boston Scott light, so to speak. And it's a real shame that none of those running backs have made the cut. So I don't know. The Eagles have made a series of roster moves. The first five I agree with, the first 5 or 6. The 7th of Luke Juriga, I get it. It was definitely a bit aggressive. And then you've got Grayland Arnold, Deontay Burnett, and 3 running backs who are all guys you could have pegged for roster spots a week ago. You could have all made a very logistical case for all of those guys to make the roster. And now they're not. I don't know how I feel about it. I'm going to be very, very keen to see what the Eagles do next. Who makes the cut Who doesn't? My big bold take here is that all of the linebackers make the cut. That's from the very top of Nate Gary all the way down to Alex Singleton to Duke Riley. I think they all make it because the Eagles need the special teams depth if they're not keeping guys like Grayland Arnold around, for instance. I think that with only 6 players at the position anyway, with many of them being versatile, I think they're going to keep all the linebackers. I want to hear what you guys think though. How do you feel about this cut so far? Who are the players you're gutted have missed out on the roster, and who are you really rooting for to make the cut come Saturday afternoon? My name is Liam Jenkins. Thank you for watching this video. We'll see you soon.